can hear me, welcome, and we'll get started in about a minute, just as people continue to trickle into the meeting. So just bear with us a moment, please. Elizabeth, are you back? Whilst we're waiting for Elizabeth. So yes, if everyone can see their screens, it would be really helpful if you can mute your mic and turn off your video. This seems to help with bandwidth stuff on these sorts of calls when we have so many people on. I hope everyone can see the chat function and knows how to use it. We'd like you to add your name and your organisation in the chat, because this is really a conversation, as it states. It's a forum, so we want people to be meeting one another, sharing ideas, maybe making connections. And as we go through the course of the webinar, please use the chat function. You can post your comments in there. We'll do our very best to pick out your comments and questions. And it is an interesting and slightly ironic thing that basically all of these little Teams messages are disrupting my my own presentation here. But anyway, that's fine. And I should just say from the outset, if you have a mobile or another device, or perhaps you can connect via your laptop, I want to try and do a bit of a whizzy tech thing at the end. So hopefully that'll work, otherwise that'll be hilarious. Okay, so let's get started. Welcome everyone. This is an ERSA webinar in conjunction with Forefront Partners and Aptem Employ. I'll just introduce myself. I'm Tony Carr. I'm the director for Forefront Partners, and I'm privileged to be able to host this this forum today. Our main guest today on this forum is Richard Alberg, CEO of Aptem Employ. And if we can just flick to the agenda slide, Richard. Fantastic. Thank you. So Richard, I'll hand over to you in a moment, but just so that everyone can see what we're doing for the next hour, I'll give you a bit of a detail about what we're going to do today. In a moment, Elizabeth Taylor, CEO of ERSA, is going to give us an update on all things from the sector. Then we are going to go into a conversation. Changes, challenges, and the role of digital in the future. So Richard has got a few slides and a wealth of experience that he's going to share with us. And following that, we want to open this up to questions and comments from you, the audience. And yeah, I think this is really interesting, I think, because I'm really happy that Richard and his team actually inspired the idea of having more conversations about the role of digital and technology within the employability sector. And I think it's an incredibly important time for us to be considering the role of tech in how we deliver services. So I'll come on to that in a bit more detail in a moment. Elizabeth, are you there and ready to say hello with your ERSA update? Thank you very much.
So I'll keep this really brief, and I won't bombard you with lots of dates, because anything I tell you about now will be in ERSA bulletins and on the ERSA website. It's been a very exciting week for the sector, because we got the results of the new commercial agreement with the DWP, and we can see who's landed on tier 1 and tier 2 and will be able to bid for future DWP procurement. So we've organised a whole range of events for the sector to meet the new primes, and for the primes to meet people who operate or have interest in the contract package areas that they've been successful in. So please look at the ERSA bulletins and get the dates of those. So we've got a big Meet the Primes event on Friday the 23rd, and then after that, lots of CPA-based events.
Let me just see if I can get the...
Hello, you can hear somebody else. We've got lots of activity going on around Kickstart and making sure Kickstart works. So again, please check the ERSA bulletins for that. We're building local partnerships and a collaboration space. So please look at what we've been putting out around that. We've got other things going on around youth and the Youth Unemployment Challenge. So again, check the bulletins. And I would also just like to say we are soon migrating to our new website. We're really excited about this. It's a website for ERSA to share information with the sector, but also has an area on the website where ERSA members can collaborate and share ideas. So it's good for all of us. And in the coming weeks, we'll have a new conference platform. So lots going on. Very excited about today. I'm going to be quiet now and hand over. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. In a moment, like I said, Richard's going to be talking to us, and I'm thrilled that Richard is on this conference, because I am in no way a tech expert, a digital expert. Apparently, I just like talking, so that's why I'm involved today. I'm not a Luddite, but I'm looking forward to what Richard has to say about the role of digital technology in employability support. Before I hand over, just a quick couple of reflections from me. I started off, I suppose, in the sector actually just after I left university, when I became unemployed, and that was I was just thinking about this in terms of how digitalization has changed over the years, and I remember going into the job centre with cards up on the board, no computers anywhere. I'll show my age there. And very little in the way of digital inclusion. But I became an employment advisor in 2004, I think. And what struck me about this whole piece around all of the different players involved, whether you're a job seeker, an advisor, perhaps a manager of a team, through to the recruitment journey and a recruiter, an employer. And I suppose digital has various touch points along those pathways and through those players. When I was an advisor in those early days, what struck me most, I think, about digital was how many of my clients or the people looking for work didn't have either access or perhaps digital literacy to do their best in terms of using the emerging platform of the internet. So I think that's something that we want to discuss today, that kind of how job seekers can use tech. We know that with everything that's going on in the world right now, we've got a huge number of newly unemployed people, and probably not perhaps long-term unemployed, so maybe with more digital skill sets. But Richard, I'm sure, will come on to talk about this. And then when I was a manager of operations, employability operations, what always concerned me was the level of digital kind of literacy, if you like, of the advisor community. And I had advisors who were very good and could be quite whizzy on all manner of different platforms and working through the PowerPoint and Word and what have you, but I was always concerned for people, unemployed people coming into the office, that they might actually be assigned an advisor who didn't have adequate digital skills to help them. So I think there's an element there of kind of almost like the inequality of service. And so I'm interested to hear, really, seeing as we've got this this huge change in the world, what the future is going to look like. And I think there's clearly going to be opportunities for technology within the employability space to aid more people into work at probably a faster rate. And there's the potential also that we have some challenges along the way there as well. And I think we should be discussing and recognizing those as well. So that's my kind of very quick overview of what I think is going on. I'd like to welcome Richard Alberg, and Richard, would you mind introducing yourself to the group and then taking us through your thoughts, and then we can generate a bit of a debate?
Of course, and thank you, Tony, and thank you for chairing this. It's really helpful, and I'm going to make a few points over the next few minutes, but I think a key part of this is, with these new contracts, we have a real opportunity to rethink how we do things, and digital's clearly going to form a part of it. So this is about catalyzing a conversation about the possible and ideas, and therefore I do hope that people will feel free to give their thoughts after, you know, I presented a few slides. But as Tony indicated, my name is Richard Alberg. I'm the founder of NWS Technology, the company behind Aptem, and I've been in this sector almost a decade, 5 years or so, with heavily involved in employment services, and then moved into vocational training. And in fact, I partnered with Sean Williams, who was on our board, and Sean and I co-founded Corndell, and Corndell has grown into a reasonably substantial training provider, but as also some of you will know, Adecco Working Ventures is 50% Corndell and 50% Adecco. So we are on tier 1 pretty much, well, in 4 areas, and tier 2 in 2, plus national. So in speaking today, I hope to sort of speak about it from a technology perspective, because my day job is NWS Technology in Aptem, but also with half a foot in the camp of a delivery organisation. So a few thoughts. You know, the past 10 years in this space, I think it's worth considering that sort of the DWP have not been perhaps an altogether welcoming, arms open, let's bring in new tech into this space. It's been really challenging. Any provider, any prime wishing to introduce something new has had to jump through so many hoops that it pretty soon encourages that organisation to stick with what they've got. And as such, there hasn't been a lot of technology innovation. It's been really difficult to have technology innovation. And I think also at the time when this sector last grew a lot, which was after the financial crash, so sort of 2010, 2011, there was a perception, whether true or not, that job seekers weren't really interested in using technology, and therefore it shouldn't be a focus of providers to invest in this area. I think also that there was a challenge in that many advisors weren't that tech savvy. You know, people weren't drawn into this sector because they liked technology. They came to this sector because they felt maybe they could help people. They were drawn to the human dimension, the human side of delivery, and therefore technology wouldn't have been the sort of default way of looking at things. So for those reasons, I think, where technology did exist in the sector, and it certainly did exist, but where it existed, it was heavily focused on case management. You know, at the end of the day, huge numbers of interactions were taking place with large numbers of job seekers, and they had to be logged and recorded in order for reports to be created and claims to be made, etc., etc. So case management was absolutely a focus. Compliance also was a key area. Frankly, if you weren't compliant, it was at minimum financially painful, but it also could take one into legal jeopardy. I mean, there were people who were prosecuted, and maybe they were prosecuted because they genuinely were doing crooked things, and maybe they were prosecuted because they couldn't find a piece of paper that needed to evidence something without which it was perceived to be fraud. So compliance was absolutely key, and I think remains so, but certainly was key, and therefore technology could assist with that. And finally, from a provider's perspective, it's kind of useful to get paid. And so much of the claims process was driven by evidentiary data that would be generated by your technology system, and also the supply chain that works for you. So I think that that was kind of how the tech scene looked: 2011, 2012, 2013, and then by 2016, the sort of job seeker mostly being assisted had considerable barriers to employment. Unemployment consistently reduced, employment consistently increased. Therefore, if you were unemployed and you were being supported by the outsourced sector, then essentially you had been unemployed for quite a while. In all likelihood, there were reasons that were significant and for which assistance was required that went beyond a tech solution. Meanwhile, given the number of participants and given the way DWP essentially really, the vast majority of provision was taking place from Job Centre Plus, not from the outsourced sector, there was no money. There was no funds in the sector. People were struggling to stay afloat, let alone to invest in interesting areas. So essentially, not much happened for quite a while. And I think that's really how the last 10 years looked. And frankly, up until sort of February of this year, that's how it would have appeared to anyone looking at the space. Of course, March, everything changed. And I think that has some real implications. So obviously, unemployment started rising immediately, but there's this sense of almost we ain't seen nothing yet. Furloughs being unwound, the level of support being provided is being reduced, and meanwhile the economic pain being felt by certain sectors. I'm so sorry. The economic pain being felt by certain sectors is so significant that job losses are going to be huge. Doesn't matter which economist one follows, it's pretty key what's happening. And what that means is, just from a mathematical perspective, if you take X 100,000 unemployed people currently, and you add to them 1 or 2 or 3 million more people who were employed or ordinarily would have found a job, then mathematically, essentially, the majority of the unemployed fall into the job ready bucket as opposed to those with barriers. So if you were saying where should the sector be directing most of its resources, well, the bulk of the those needing assistance are going to fall into the category of had it not been for COVID, they would have got a job or would have remained in employment. Equally, there's a lot of money going to be floating around to fund our sector. Whether it's the headline 7.5 billion CARES or whether it is the many other buckets of support that are out there, the funding that's available is quite considerable, which suddenly creates the environment whereby people can invest, can take risks, can experiment. I think we finally can throw away the argument that people aren't online. A few years ago, I used to get very frustrated when hearing these arguments, and I would say, but look how many people are on Facebook. Who are we kidding? Who are these people who aren't online when you look at so many people who patently are? I mean, of course there were people who were digitally excluded, of course, but there were so many who were capable, and to generalize that everyone is excluded is as bad as generalizing that everyone is included. It's as bad to do it the other way. But I think lockdown has made us recognize that online is the norm. And possibly, just possibly, the DWP is, I'm so sorry, my phone rings on my computer as well. So although my computer is muted, so my phone is muted, my computer rings when the phone rings. Anyway,
you might need a tech expert to help you with that, Richard.
Can you find one? Can you find one? I'll give it a kick afterwards. Don't worry, that'll work. I'm talking about the computer, not the tech expert, I think.
Sure,
but
sure,
I don't know. Could work either way. Anyway, and I think the DWP's recognised that digital is the way forward. You know, even down to the original CARES briefings, you know, digital was one of the opening observations. And indeed, we've got the job finding service right now, which is being tendered, and that is a digital only or predominantly digital delivered solution. And finally, of course, we don't know how long lockdown or some form of lockdown will persist for. So I suppose with all of that in mind, how will this impact on sector technology? And it strikes me, I've prepared two slides, one looking at the short term and one the long term, well, the medium term, not even the long term, just the medium term. And I think in the short term, we are going to recognise that self-service is a norm. You know, it's self-service by the job seeker, where they are consuming the assistance by default rather than having it done for them or imposed on them, is both pragmatic, objectively sensible, and also economically essential. Finally, there aren't enough advisors out there to do the running around necessary to support several million job seekers in a way that would have been the case for a far lower number of people with significant barriers. So I think self-service is a norm, and that means technologies that support self-service. Segmentation, you know, talk to any marketing person and they'll talk about how they don't just regard all people as having the same challenges, the same interests, the same ways of behaving. You know, you segment people into groups and then personalize the service around their needs. And I think that the ability to use technology to segment and as such provide a more relevant service is something we're going to see now. We are seeing now, and we'll see a lot more of. Technology is very good at doing this at scale, and it certainly gets better results as a consequence. The employment plan created for an individual, there is no reason why technology, perhaps also using that argument of segmentation, can't automate so much of the direction and journey. Now, the potential challenge is where you have a funder with a very prescriptive delivery model that requires you to do A, B, C, and D in that order, in which case, as a provider, it doesn't really matter whether a different journey would be superior. What you're paid to deliver and what is compliant is A, B, C, and D. But I think the potential for automated employment plans is quite high. And with that, also nudging. You know, being able to spot things that happen or don't happen, patterns, breaks in pattern. You know, if someone looks for a job every day at a particular time for a particular amount of time and then stops, there's no reason why a nudge couldn't go to the individual and or the advisor, triggered by the automation and the observation that something different is now occurring and it's worth exploring why. Or it could just be reminders, or it could be triggered by, you know, ratios, number of applications to interview, all sorts of things. Maybe you need practice in doing better applications if you're not getting the interviews, but are clearly nevertheless very active. So the ability to have intelligent nudging. Remote delivery, you know, we are today using Teams. We haven't been to a conference for a very long time. I've had one face-to-face meeting since March. It was very odd doing that. You know, the fact is that remote delivery, whether using Zoom or Teams or whatever, is going to be the norm. You'll have advisors who may or may not be able to work from the office, and you'll have participants who may or may not feel comfortable visiting an office and getting there and having the meeting. Dashboards and real-time performance management, the ability to use data. I mean, historically, you would learn 2 or 3 weeks later how your program was doing. Nowadays, it is, sorry, I can see there's someone on my screen. Nowadays, you know, real-time data of exactly what matters, ratios that you're interested in, performance data on your on your advisors, performance data on job seekers, participants, time for referrals, time to, activity levels. All of that can real time be available and can inform business decision. And then finally, predictive algorithms. The ability to start looking into the future, not necessarily 6 months or a year or 2 years, not some sort of minority report type model, but just turning around and saying, well, if this and this has happened, then probably that's going to be what comes next. Now, these sorts of algorithms are easy to generate and pretty reliable. And if you can start to know what might be about to happen, you can take preventative action where it makes sense to do so. So all of these things are absolutely doable here and now and should be part of CARES when CARES launches. This is not pie in the sky stuff. This is here and now. And the smart providers will be doing this because it will result in better outcomes. And if there's payment by results, that matters. And it will result in the ability to stand out versus other providers and thus presumably result in greater business volumes or not losing volumes to others. And it will result in far greater efficiency of operation. But I think in the medium term, there's some really exciting things that have the potential to be introduced. I spoke about personalization and segmentation, but the potential to really drive that, where you're basically looking at all aspects of interaction down to the most minute level, of whether someone did a little exercise and assessment, how long they took, whether they redid it, how often, what time they log on for. All sorts of data points can be used, and given the numbers of people we will be assisting, the volume of data that's going to be collected is going to inform massive amounts of personalization, and you're going to just iteratively improve the outcomes using data to inform what worked, what didn't work, trying things out and iterating constantly to superior outcomes. Behavioral science, the whole area of nudging, is a fascinating field of research, where you go from the most obvious nudge to actually subtleties that result in perceptible differences. What color a nudge should be in, what time a nudge should happen, what font it should be in. Even they do some quite, not just the nudge itself, but the nature of how the nudge is delivered, and what sequence of nudges work best. Again, I think we're going to get a lot better at that and see more interesting outcomes. Here's an interesting one, which is, we might have an arms race with employers as they face up to the consequences. But, right now with Aptem Employ, we scour the web. We get just about every advertised vacancy from every job board in the country, deduplicate, match it to individuals based on their interests, skills, etc. But still, the individual has to apply. Still, they have to follow the application process of the employer. But with bot technology and machine learning, there's no particular reason why you couldn't automate the application process in quite a credible fashion. Once one knows what are the requirements of the employer and what are the application processes, actually pretty much everything up to the interview itself could be automated. Are we going to find providers automating it? And a little anecdote, my last career before I started MWS was I founded a firm of occupational psychologists that designed selection systems for very large employers. One of our clients was the Royal Mail, and it was my first exposure to the, as then was, welfare to work sector, was Royal Mail getting 500,000 or so applicants a year and trying to deal with the influx of people who had no real interest in working there, but knew that if they didn't apply, and applying for a postman was one of the obvious jobs, they didn't apply for a job at Royal Mail, they would get sanctioned. So they were essentially applying for jobs they had no interest in order to keep Job Centre Plus, as not then was, Job Centre happy. But from Royal Mail's perspective, it meant a goodly proportion of their applicant pool had to somehow be separated from those who really were interested in the job, and they needed mechanisms to manage that. And that was the first time I heard of this as a thing. But the facts are that if you're just forcing job applicants to apply whether they have any interest in a job or not, then you're going to get equivalent behaviours from employers trying to block that. In the same way, we may well find that the ability of providers to take the job seeker further in the application process is going to trigger some interesting outcomes. But certainly this is entirely doable, the sort of automation of application. We'll think about how we assist the job seeker be effective, but why shouldn't we match job seekers to advisors far better? Why shouldn't we understand what sort of individuals an advisor gets best results with, what sort of individual a job seeker is, and on that basis match very quickly or possibly switch? There is no reason why that can't be done. There are so many technology systems we interact with that very quickly form a judgment about you based upon a relatively small number of inputs that allow you to be described in a fashion as to, what type of buying behavior you'll have, what type of decision making you have, what sort of things might and you'll find websites dynamically respond in that fashion. There's no particular reason why advisor matching couldn't be based on a little bit more science rather than just luck of the draw and who's available. And then the whole area of in-work, once one looks at getting someone into work and in-work retention, the whole work of how you support someone and how you predict when the person's likely to have an issue and going to drop out. Now, some things you can't readily identify a handle, and some things will always require sort of, human preemption. But the ability to start to spot issues in communication, sentiment analysis is the term used. It's something that there's a lot of work going on in terms of understanding how the language when one speaks, how one communicates in written form, and you can get a lot about a person's mood from that. And if you can start to do mood analysis, you can start to then maybe spot an issue that can be preempted and dealt with. In the same way, though, of course, tech readily available would allow an individual to declare a concern quite quickly, which may be dealt with before it gets to a head and becomes the person's now left their job and presented a problem to the provider. So all of these things are things that I see as happening probably by 2023, as long as it's not prevented. By 2023, these medium-term items could be in play. So I hope that's been helpful. With that in mind, Tony, back to you.
Oh, Richard, thank you. That's fantastic. Thanks for that run through. I know I've got tons of questions, but I'm quite keen to bring people in initially. However, I'm just really taken initially with the job seeker advisor match, because as part of what I said previously, my concern as a manager of a team of advisors was the equality of service, or the likelihood of someone moving into work based on the advisor that worked with them. Do you have further information about how that works? Are we talking about the same kind of thing that dating sites use to match people up? Is this a thing already, or is this something that you think is really relatively easy to input into the system?
It's a really easy thing. I mean, you joke. I mean, dating sites are the most obvious area, for probably, I don't know how many years, but dating companies have looked at how you try and put two people together. You've got assessments that focus on teams and how teams can gel and the sorts of individuals that will work well. And of course, it's not precise and it's not perfect, but you can appreciate that, some advisors, some advisors can flex their temperament, can be empathetic, sympathetic and understanding on the one moment, and quite forceful and clear cut in their expectations the next. Now, that's a great skill set to have, to be able to flex so broadly. But if an advisor has a particular way about them or a particular style, and a little bit about the job seeker from assessment, why wouldn't you match? Probably a good branch manager would always have taken a view about probably Mary or possibly Jane would be best looking after that particular participant, but there's no reason why one couldn't start to automate that.
Okay, really interesting. Thank you, Richard. Now, I would really like to open it up to some of the questions and comments in the chat. So this is the bit where we kind of screens and look a bit awkward. So apologies for doing that. I should just say as well that whilst I've got a few questions for Richard is not, you know, the face of technology in the world. So he may not be able to answer everything, and he's not responsible for UC or anything like that, so we shouldn't try and get him with some of those questions. But let's have a quick look at the chat. I did notice something from Jackie earlier that other people are talking about, which is I don't want to put words in her mouth, but see if I can find it here. Well, it's actually two questions, Richard. Perhaps you can reflect on this. So what, in terms of technology, can you point to either systems or platforms or apps or whatever that actually really work right now for particular people? And secondly, a completely different question. I think it's reasonable to say that there's a fear out there in the marketplace that with a huge influx of newly unemployed people, potentially more employable people, that the people that we've been supporting for the last few years are going to be even further away, or perhaps nudged out by more employable people who potentially have more access and more literacy when it comes to digital. So how can digital be a kind of solution for people who might be further away from work? So there's two questions there, sorry.
Yeah, and I would like to please others to give their views as well, because just, you know, my views are my views, but we've got a lot of experienced people who are participating in this meeting. But I'll duck the first question as to technology systems, because it's fairly obvious I have a vested interest in Aptem Employ and think it does all these wonderful things. So can we take it as read? I'll answer Aptem to any question of that nature. And I'll move on. Let's talk about the issue of, but what can technology do? To me, you're trying to enable someone to go on a journey. You're trying to break down barriers. You're trying to facilitate achievement, and you're trying to do this at scale, and you're trying to do this in geographically dispersed locations. We also have a productivity issue in this country, which is, you know, if we just shove people from one pretty cruddy job to the next pretty cruddy job, then it should come as no surprise that there is a large group of marginalized individuals who at best have a pretty unhappy existence. At worst, it's downright awful when the economy catches a cold. So within that context, how you upskill people really matters. Now, as I mentioned when I mentioned my other, you know, involvement with training, you know, I think the apprenticeship system is one which has proven itself very good at delivering volume training across a broad range of, very broad range of vocational areas. And I think that any solution really should try and say, how do you upskill people so they have more choices? And the difference between, you know, having no skills and getting to level 3, essentially an A-level type qualification, you know, is a difference between, you know, a 2 or 3 month course could mean a difference between 18,000, 20,000 a year when you're working and 35,000 a year and people interested in you. You know, we're not talking about degrees. We're not talking about, you know, years of work. Now, provision of vocational skills, I think, is a core part of the solution. But the bottom line is, of course, people who have less to offer and more barriers are going to find it harder if there are more job-ready individuals, you know, able to sell themselves better to employers and doing so in volume. And that is going to be the reality for the next few years until the economy picks up and has soaked up so many of the current unemployed. But this time round, we have an additional complication, which is the sectors that have been so badly damaged, they may not recover that quickly. So areas like hospitality and retail have been profoundly transformed by the last few months. And it's hard to see how they will simply bounce back. It's not like, you know, the banks start lending again and everything returns to normal. this is a more significant. The answer to that will be difficult. I do think technology is part of this solution, mainly on training, because it can be done at a distance, because it can be done in one's own time, because it is so cheap to operate, because it scales so well.
Okay, thank you, Richard. A reminder to the audience, if you wish to, please raise your hand, and we'd love to welcome you in. You can use your very own voice to ask the questions, or I can read some more out from the chat. I've got one here for you. Well, actually, no, let's think about this for a moment. If like me at the beginning of lockdown, people started engaging with the kind of Joe Wicks type phenomenon of, that kind of remote personal training. I didn't do it for very long, unfortunately. But is this part of what we're going to see, do you think, in terms of employability support, that a certain group of people that we're going to be supporting will be supported in a, I'm not saying a YouTube channel like Joe Wicks has done, but is that something that you think is going to happen and are advocating, do you think, Richard?
Well, again, I'd try to keep an eye on the chat to see other views on things like this. There's no reason why it couldn't. There are some practical challenges. I mean, sort of one-to-many broadcasts are quite easy. It's when you start having group dynamics that it gets challenging to manage and maintain, and can have a small minority of people can wreck it for the majority of sort of positive participants, and that's a challenge with sort of group sessions. But there is no reason why one wouldn't have e-learning guidance thoughts as YouTube channel, or using any other form of social media to communicate. Whether that will be provided within the sort of paid for system, this sort of network of sort of professionals, or whether that's going to just emerge through someone stepping forward and just being good at it, will be interesting to see. So the thing about job searches, for many people, it's something they just do very infrequently, and once it's done, and they don't think about it again. It's part of the reason why so many people have poor job search skills, because let's face it, you don't need it that often. And when the market was buoyant, finding a job was kind of, someone often tapped you on the shoulder and said, "You interested in a move? We're looking for someone like you." That's how you change job. My big fear with the current crisis is the psychological impact of rejection after a handful of months, and the negative behavior cycles that brings in, which is an area where technology can help. Just like Google tried stopping you, sending that email at 2 a.m. with a certain amount of rage in it, the system could warn you, do you really mean to send it, or would you like to leave this till the morning? Or just like it can say there's no attachment to that email, or any of the other little tricks and tricks that you will have seen as systems get smarter. In the same way, if someone starts applying and doesn't get anywhere, doesn't even have the courtesy of acknowledgement or any feedback, it's quite easy to become resentful of the next employer you're applying to, and think that all of the ills of the past unfriendly and impolite employers apply equally to this new one, and that can affect, therefore, the whole tone of your application. And actually, a good system should be able to pick that out. Just the language you're using on your application form, the language you're using on your accompanying email. Those are all things where you can start to say, look, you're at risk of sounding and appearing bitter, perhaps quite naturally, but that's going to become a self-defining and vicious circle. Now, that's an area where tech can help. And I do think it's going to be a challenge over the next couple of years, where there is no nice answer. It's going to be pretty brutal for many job seekers.
I'm going to go to a question in the chat. We've got time for a couple more questions. Deborah Chowney has put in a really good question. Deborah, forgive me, I'm going to just read out bits of it, but if I'm missing a point, please come in. Part of Deborah's point is that, having been in the sector for 30 years, she says, I can assure you it is also about the ability to read the person you are working with, how you use life experience to think outside the box. Will automated systems be able to do this?
Not as well as your best advisors. Absolutely not. But whenever you have an awards ceremony and they talk about the advisor of the year, that always depresses me, because the advisor of the year, by definition, you're saying, here is Fred, and Fred is superb, because most other advisors aren't nearly as good as Fred. So if you're lucky, you get Fred as your advisor, and Fred gets it, and Fred will help you, and Fred will really make a difference to your life. But if you're unlucky and you don't get Fred, but in fact you get Jim, you're kind of in trouble, because Jim's a bit new to the job. Jim got this job because it was the only job going, frankly, and doesn't really like it that much, and you're not going to get the support you'd really like. Now, you know, what you get from computers is every time you improve the way the system operates, it consistently does that for each and every service recipient. You constantly raise the bar. Now, it won't ever get as good as the best advisor. And some of those best advisors form firms like us as we design our systems to help us improve how we do things. But cloning good advisors, that the technology to do that is a long way behind the technology to improve good, employment service systems.
It's. I think this is such an important point, Richard, and it extends to, again, digital. I suppose literacy. I mean, I've got a very whizzy TV downstairs where you can get any number of movies and box sets. It's fantastic. Now, can my wife use it? No, she can't. So anyway, I mean, it's from the point of view of.
Can I come in here, guys? I'm Deborah Chowney.
Yeah, of course you can,
Deborah.
yeah.
Hello there, and good afternoon all. I just wanted to raise, I absolutely agree with the point you made about the award ceremonies, and look at Bob, and isn't Bob brilliant? And yet there are so many wonderful, skilled, experienced people in this sector. And one of my concerns, and I've voiced this a number of times, has been we really need to get people to realise the skill set, the experience, the expertise that makes an employment advisor somebody that actually knows their stuff. And I'm really concerned at the moment about this rush to recruit extra advisors in this industry to push schemes like jets, when actually it's longer than 5 minutes to induct someone to help a person who's feeling like nobody cares, that they're on the scrap heap, that they don't understand how their skills translate to other industries. And I just want to raise that point, that actually one of the biggest fears I have for this sector is people don't actually understand how much good work truly goes on and how long it takes to learn your role and your job. That's it, really. That's just my point.
Thank you. Richard, do you want to say any point? I think I do think it's a point that shouldn't be left in the ether, and actually I think it's a question for ERSA and the IEP to be thinking about how we help to influence not only the department, but thousands of advisors or job coaches who, again, I share your concerns, Deborah, around the kind of the skill level and how straightforward that is. But I think we need to lobby in whatever way we can, either through ERSA or IEP, to make that happen. So thank you, Deborah.
But the bottom is there is no way around the fact that a vastly larger number of advisors are needed at very short notice, and therefore by definition they won't be experienced people who've learned so many things through exposure. You're just going to have to accept that we're going to get lots of new people, and with that, unfortunately, variable quality.
Yeah, okay, that's good. Now we have got only a few minutes left, so I'm going to say thank you very much, Richard, for all of your input today. Obviously, you're not going to go anywhere just yet. We've got a couple of other things to do on this call. So, Richard, could you just move us on to the next slide, please? So initially, I want to promote, and Joe, can you come in a sec, Joe Ingold? as I said, Richard and his team inspired ERSA to think about, well, actually, we need to have more than one conversation about digital and technology in employability. So announcing the very new, shiny ERSA Digital Forum, which I believe is going to be sponsored by Aptem Employ next week as well. But that's going to kick off next week. And on Monday, I don't know if Joe's there and ready to speak, but we are going to be launching in that meeting, excuse me, a new academic research piece, which is going to be looking at the role of technology within the employability space. Joe, don't steal your colleague's thunder, because David's going to be there on Monday, but can you give a very quick introduction to what that will be looking at and what you need from people on this call?
Yeah, a teaser. Can you hear me okay, Tony?
Yeah, lovely.
Great. Okay, because I had an issue with sound on an earlier call. Great. Yes, I'm not going to steal my colleague David Robertshaw's thunder on this, but we're very excited to announce that we have some funding via the Economic and Social Research Council in the UK to look at digitalisation of employment support in the UK and Australia, because there's some interesting developments happening in both countries that a number of people on the call may well know about. So we are looking for your input. We are planning a survey, we're planning interviews, we're interested to get technical perspectives as well as a range of other perspectives of frontline advisors as well. So a real range, really, people who are procuring systems. So really to map out the elements, what's going on. There's a lot of assumptions being made about digital. So we haven't got all the answers, and we really appreciate your input. And I've probably said more than enough, so I'll be quiet.
That's fine, Joe. I won't tell him that you did that.
He is on the call, actually.
Oh, I think. David, I'm so sorry. You could have done that already, but there we go. I will just say this ERSA Digital Forum at the moment, Joe and I have put our hands up to help ERSA in hosting that. So we're becoming the Richard and Judy of these things, Joe. I'm Judy in that scenario. So thank you very much, and that'll be next Monday. That's the start of a new forum. To help this new forum, I want to try this Wizzy Tech thing, because we need some input from the group on this call to say exactly what you would like to see within this new digital forum. What should we be talking about? What agenda items should we have? What guests and what technology should we be reviewing? So, Richard, would you mind moving me on to the next slide, because I want to take just the last few minutes to do something very exciting and very high risk, which is basically me trying to do something techie. Now, this could absolutely crash and burn, but let's just try it anyway. I should just say I offered to, move the slides on during this webinar, but Richard kind of stepped in and said, no, I'll do that, because he kind of, he knew what I was like. So I'm going to share my screen because this is really exciting. The question I'm asking here is, what agenda items or content or other topics do you want to see in the ERSA Digital Forum? And I will share my screen. So if you can go to www.menti.com and use the code 8200295. What that should do.
Let me stop sharing now.
You can do. I'm just going to try and share my slide window. Okay, just give me a second. I can't even share a window. How silly is that? Now, this is basically a live stream from a very whizzy little thing which produces a word cloud. So if you could go in there and use your answers to put in the type of content you'd like to see within the ERSA Digital Forum, I would very much appreciate it. Joe and Richard and Isla and Elizabeth, I expect you to be putting some stuff in here as well, so that we can build a live Wordcloud. Are they called Wordclouds? Anyway, of the type of topics that people want to see. So I can't tell at the moment how many people have been doing this.
The code is 8200295.
Thank you, Richard. Glamorous assistant.
Not just a finger for the slide movement.
Hey, this is working. What happens is you basically the ones that get the most votes, if you like, or the ones that match the ones that most people put in start to appear in the middle in larger fonts. So digital literacy is kind of the big thing that's coming out of this, but also self-service, digital access, digital apprenticeships, digital roles. Very interesting. It's changing as we speak, as more people add their answers. I've just got to quickly check the chat because I think some people are making comments and I can't see them. So we'll take this away, and Joe and I will use this to put together the content of these forums to make them most relevant to you, the viewing public. And that is a really good set of bit of feedback. We've got integration of systems again. Someone's put employment advisors. I don't know whether they want to see digital employment advisors, but maybe it's more to do with, I said, maybe digital training with there. Ethical issues, which is a great one to bring up. Wonderful. Okay, good. That's great. It really just leaves me to again thank Richard and Aptem Employ for this webinar. Thank you to the audience for your contributions. This has been recorded and I believe this will be available on a YouTube channel somewhere. I think Laura from ERSA will communicate that to people afterwards, and anything that comes out of the chat by way of a question that you want answered, we'll make sure that that's answered for you. Thank you to ERSA for hosting this as well. So thank you all. That's it for today.